right now, Douglas County wants to join 4 other counties and become a home rule county. That would allow them to be exempt from some state laws and even to make some more of their own decisions. The home rule issue is just one of the topics discussed in the newest episode of the Business Buzz that starts streaming on 9 News Plus tomorrow. Here's a sneak peek.
Home rule municipalities, that is a lot of things that people care about. It's land use, it's elections, it's the structure of their government. It is whether or not they have a merit system or civil service, how they handle eminent domain, all sorts of things that are enshrined within a home rule charter. And the importance of that is creating certainty to be able to, again, legislate locally without interference from the state.
Always an interesting conversation. The co-host of the Business Buzz, Ed Sealover, here with me live this morning. Thank you so much for being here, Ed.
Thanks for having me in, Lauren.
So let's talk about the conversation and the impact here in Colorado.
Yeah, so as you see, we bring on Kevin Baumer, who is the executive director of the Colorado Municipal League, and a lot of the conversation revolves around a recently filed lawsuit from 6 cities that are taking on 2 laws that the state legislature passed last year. One of those laws requires increased zoning density around transit hubs, so there can be a lot easier to build apartment buildings and condo buildings there. The second law bans those same governments from requiring minimum parking amounts in those same areas. Both of these laws were passed by Governor Polis and his supporters with the idea that we need more housing, quite frankly. You know, one of the reasons we're one of the most expensive housing states in the country is because we have a lack of housing, as much as 100,000 or more units that need to be built right away. Polis wants to knock down local barriers that he says get in the way of putting up those apartments and condos around transit hubs. Local cities, however, say, look, that's not the state's business. Under the home rule system, we get to control our zoning laws, we get to control the character of our communities and whether or not we feel they have enough infrastructure to handle the housing that's being asked for there. And so we get into those issues. What is a local issue, and how do we actually attack the housing affordability crisis without mandates like these?
Sure. And you guys really did cover a lot of bases here. You guys also talked about the impact of the potential federal cuts on Colorado. What does that look like? Now,
getting into discussion about the budget cuts is a huge topic. So we decided to focus on a couple areas that particularly hit business. One of those is Medicaid, and there's a lot of talk about Medicaid cuts, but we focus on how they would impact particularly rural hospitals and inner city hospitals that have an inordinate number of patients that are coming from the Medicaid rolls. And if those patients lose their insurance and they're coming in without insurance, will they be able to pay it all? And what's that impact going to be on the healthcare providers? Another issue that we get into is one that's buried a little further, but is very important to the business community. It's about the fact there is no funding in this budget to replace a 30-year-old fleet of aerial wildfire fighting planes at Peterson Space Force Base down in Colorado Springs. Without this replacement, there's worry about how do we handle the wildfires that are growing in intensity and damage, and there's also concern about the future of Peterson, which with another Space Force base down there has a $4.4 billion combined economic impact on the state of Colorado. So we talk about why business groups are urging legislators in Washington to add funding for these planes and keep Peterson as relevant as it can be in a time of budget cuts.
Always an interesting conversation, Ed. Thank you so much for joining us this morning. Of course, you can catch the new Business Buzz on 9 News Plus starting at 2:10 tomorrow afternoon. Ed, thank you so much.
Thanks for having me on.